Hello, Vash.
Hello there, JF. How you doing?
I'm doing good. So we are both streaming each on our side, and it's a pleasure to be talking to you.
Yeah.
I've been watching your show yesterday with Vermin Supreme, your hero, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool dude. Actually, cooler than I thought. I knew he was an anarchist. I didn't know he had such a reputation for mediating police disputes with protesters. It's pretty goddamn rad.
Red is good in
Rad
your.
is very good.
In your...
Yes.
Oh, okay.
In my barbaric Anglo, lexicon. Yes,
Because
very good.
back in the 90s, they were saying green. Green is good.
Green is good. Oh well, green
Yeah.
is still
Saying,
pretty
is
good.
that green? Yeah, green is still good.
Yeah, green is still good. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. What are we talking about?
Well, you emailed me on, I can look it up and find the exact phrasing, but I believe you said how socialism is inherently parasitic. And I was very, or something like that, inherently exploitative. I think you said parasitic. So I am very interested in hearing the specifics of that argument, and I guess we can move out from there.
All right, wonderful. Well, my view of socialism is not that it can't work on certain points and in temporary amounts of time, but I'm extremely worried about the long-term consequences of a socialist system. And by socialist, I can mean many things. Mm-hmm. It can mean a society that becomes more and more leftist. It can mean a society where the state grows too big. It can be a society that is democratic, and the democracy leads to socialism. And it can even be systems of worker co-ops. And I don't deny that these things can work out of the surplus produced by capitalism at certain points in time in certain companies. I'm from Quebec, where our banking system is actually dominated by a big co-op called the Caisse Desjardins. And it works. The people of Quebec are happy that their banking system is mostly not a private bank, but it is a co-op that they all own. That is possible at certain points in time, but in the long run, I'm worried about the dependence between, well, in the case of worker co-ops, the dependence between the direction of the corporation and the choice of workers.
Okay, so let's focus on this specifically, because we can do it procedurally in steps, of course. Because there are, as you said, there are many different types of socialism. Although you ask 10 socialists, what society do you want? You're going to get 11 different answers. So the initial step that I argue for is the seizure of the means of production, or the worker control of the means of production, and then from that point we can talk about decommodification and like the abolition of the commodity form. But if we start with worker co-ops, tell me, what specifically do you take issue with regards to worker co-ops? Why do you what worries do you have?
Now, to be clear, your dream has been realized for the last month, right? The means of production have been seized. They have been seized on the excuse of COVID-19, but technically, I mean, we are in a communistic society at this point. People cannot go to their own work.
I don't know if we have the same definition of communistic. I mean, we still live in a stated classed society over which the workers have no control over the means of production. I guess, like, you could argue, like, the government has assumed the authority to shut down businesses, but I don't think that has anything to do with communism.
Okay, well, it has to do with the means of production having been seized. So I don't. I guess we could say we are not fully into communism, but we are well in that direction. In any case, my problem with with worker co-ops is not that they can't work. I mean, there are examples of worker co-ops that end up surviving for a while. My problem is that they don't import all of the incentive systems of capitalism. So in capitalism, you have rewards for proper resource allocation. And I think that the problem of worker co-ops is that there is no reward for proper resource allocation. In other words, you are putting the power of choice over the direction of the corporation in the hands of people who have not demonstrated that they had a particular talent for it. In other words, because the workers, they have demonstrated that they had a talent for working. They have not demonstrated that they had a talent for managing and for betting on which direction to take in the future.
Okay,
and while
wait, can I tackle that point specifically before we move on?
Go ahead.
I'm not entirely sure what you mean, because worker co-ops have the same fundamental market-driven incentive structure that traditional firms do. A worker cooperative is still financially incentivized to produce products that will appeal to the greatest number of people here, because in doing so, they further the profits of their firm. Like a worker cooperative, it doesn't change its relationship with the outside world, the broader market systems. It interacts with it the same way a traditionally managed firm would. The only difference is that internally there's a system of democracy rather than an autocratic top-down boss manager worker system. But I don't think that fundamentally this like disincentivizes like an appropriate distribution of resources.
Well, absolutely. I think it does. And I think it's this democratic aspect that is a problem, because the problem being you can have new workers, and the new workers, they come in and they have interest. And this is where I use the word exploitative or parasitic. It's that these new workers, they come in and they have interest in draining the most money from that corporation to them. And it's a very different relationship that the capitalist, the owner of a corporation, someone like Elon Musk, can have with his own money. Because Elon Musk is both the guy who has demonstrated capacity for innovation in the past and now has the money to drive future innovation in the future. In the case of the worker co-ops, first, we don't have much Elon Musk-like worker co-ops.
That's probably a good thing.
I think
I'm a little confused by the premise here. New workers mean parasitism? The new workers would benefit financially from making sure that the worker co-op does as good as possible because they share wages with everyone else at their level. I don't see how this is any different. Like, in fact, I could make the argument that parasitism is more common in traditionally managed firms because the instance of CEOs and stockholders coming in to like rape and pillage the company before selling it off or abandoning has been fairly common. Like, that's a fairly common practice. That's why Trump had all those bankruptcies before he became president. You make as much money as you can as an executive off a company, you drive it into the ground, and then you have a business bankruptcy declared, so you aren't like financially liable for anything that happened to the business that you owned. Like, I think that's parasitic as fuck. But when it comes to worker co-ops, like new workers that come in, they just become part of the democratic system, and they're also financially incentivized to maintain the health of the firm. That's one of the reasons why we've started paying CEOs in stock options rather than in cash, because that way CEOs are incentivized to manage the long-term health of the company rather than just making as much money as they can short-term and then dipping. But fundamentally, because there are no stocks in a worker co-op, because everything's collectively owned by the workers there, a share in private equity from that worker co-op is having a share in its stocks fundamentally. So I would say this is actually a system that would reduce the amount of parasitism in the economy, not increase it.
Very interesting. There's 2 points that I want to answer. The first is concerning the worker joining the worker co-op. I think that there's a problem here because the worker joining the worker co-op adds a voice to the democratic control of the co-op, and yet has not demonstrated having the intelligence to drive innovation, to drive decision-making and managerial decision. I think this is where the bug happens in worker co-op. On your second point concerning parasitism as part of the capitalist system, I actually agree with this. There are systems of parasitism that develop in capitalism, in our capitalism. In other words, our society is not ideal. I think what we should be headed is toward a system where such exploitation of firms cannot happen or are limited. But I will also say that capitalism has its own way of dealing with this parasitism, which is the fact that these people who buy a firm that was just raped by CEOs and stockholders, as you point to it, they are paying with their own money. It's already their own money, and they're wasting their money on a firm that doesn't have the value that it claims to have. And so I'm fine with it because it's private punishment of bad decision making. So if you can find a fool to be buying a stock from a raped company, so be it. The people who make these bad decisions will be punished on the market, will eventually see the price of their stocks crumbled, and I'm fine with it because it was their private property.
Yeah, but ultimately the issue is that only puts the problem down the line. Eventually, even if you only get stock options rather than cash for your performance as a CEO, that still doesn't mean you can't just sell off your your equity after you dip the company, knowing that the policies you've put in place are going to lead to long-term losses 5 or 10 years down the line. At the end of the day, it doesn't seem like there's any way to actually ensure that CEOs and stockholders have a vested interest in the long-term health of a company unless you tie their bank account to the stock price of the company in the long term. You permanently, tether their wealth to the success of the company, which we obviously can't do. It would be highly immoral. Even if there would be ways to fix the problem of executives ruining companies for short-term gain, and I'm sure there are probably ways to make capitalism better. Fundamentally, I consider the private firm model, the standard management model, to be fundamentally unethical. Even if we were to round out the edges, we're rounding out the edges of an unethical system. The earlier thing that you said, that new workers haven't proved that they're intelligent, I don't really know what relevance there is to this. At the end of the day, in any firm, traditionally managed or cooperatively managed, the owner of that firm is not the person who's engaging in innovation. It's the workers that they hire. There are some exceptions, I'm sure, but that's when the person who is an owner is also simultaneously acting as a worker. But in those instances, you also have to rely on systems to select for the best and most effective workers to provide entrepreneurial innovation. And that system is flawed in both traditionally owned firms and in worker cooperative firms. But in both cases, the pre-existing owners, whether that be the owners of the worker co-op beforehand or the firm owner, have an incentive to find people who best meet the culture of their company and who can best meet the needs of the workplace. I don't think that's something particular to worker cooperatives. I might even make the argument it would be better under worker cooperatives because there would be less opportunity for nepotism or for a disconnect between the needs of the worker and the manager to lead to poor hiring decisions.
Well, I think that you are making the example where an owner is delegating innovation, and you think it's a problem for my theory when it's not. When I say innovation, I include in this just being the guy with the cash that gives the cash to the innovator. In other words, I'm not only including the act of creativity as we do here on YouTube when we create art, and as Elon Musk does when he thinks of a new car or new system, but I also include the passing the money from the owners to the engineer. I see that capitalism has dealt this property because capitalism rewards those people with massive amounts of money who have innovated enough in the past to respond to a demand. And in that sense, the current capitalistic system is demand determined. It is determined by the customer and their desires, whatever they want and whatever they can buy. The worker co-op system doesn't have this stacking of money to a single person who in the past has been having business success in whatever enterprise he's been doing before, or maybe even his grandfather had success.
Can I clarify something? Just so I
yes.
know. When you say there's an issue with demand determined, are you saying that worker cooperative systems don't financially incentivize people to engage in innovation? Are you saying that the structure of worker cooperatives prevents them from understanding the needs of the consumer?
I believe that innovation is highly a personal thing. It's a creativity, just like we do on YouTube. That's why our YouTube channels are not YouTube co-ops. It's because creativity is an act that comes from a human mind, very often a male mind. And
wait, what does that mean?
What?
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Well, It means that Albert Einstein was a man. It means that there's lots of creativity on the male side.
That's it? Albert Einstein was a man? So men are more creative?
A lot of the scientists that have created great stuff, and the engineers are men, computer scientists, mostly male, yes.
What about like Marie Curie? Don't you think there are other socioeconomic disincentivizations that would have prevented women from participating in cutting edge fields?
Maybe there is, but I have never seen convincing evidence that it is what explains the sex disbalance in science or innovation or engineering.
Have you ever thought it's weird that over the past 150 years, there's been an exponential increase in the number of Black people in positions of technological and scientific prowess in the United States of America? Do you think the average IQ of Black Americans like skyrocketed and they were suddenly able to be creative? Or do you think there were other external pressures that prevented them from being able to participate beforehand?
Well, what explains the success of Black people in modern society as opposed to 200 years ago must be certain laws, as you say, social systems that were keeping them from having this level of success, but also breeding with European populations. We know, for example, that African Americans in the United States are the whitest Black people in the world.
Then why is it that some of the highest IQ immigrants we get are doctors and engineers from Nigeria?
Because selection. What happens in the immigration process is that you pick cherries from other countries, and this leads to a brain drain, in fact.
Okay, I agree that immigration necessarily entails a selection process, but Nigeria is also a much poorer country. I also haven't seen any evidence to indicate within the United States of America that there's a relationship between like the IQ of mixed race or Black individuals and how purely African they are. It usually seems to correlate heavily to socioeconomic factors. You can make the argument that as Black people became more mixed race, they also got involved more in the socioeconomic strata of white society. But I don't know if there's any evidence to indicate that there's a direct correlation between like the amount of African blood you have inside of you and the extent to which you're capable of like participating in like science or technology, you know?
Well, let's examine this because this was another subject. I mean, we're moving far from our initial point.
I knew we
moved
to race realism pretty much immediately.
Yes,
yep. All right, let me bring up my documents on this because I know you motherfuckers lie like crazy every single time this subject comes up.
Oh, have I ever lied to you, Vash?
To me? No. Well, hey, you know, there's a first time for everything, so let's see how this one goes, huh?
All right. You say socioeconomic factors. Do you realize that many of these socioeconomic factors that you think about when you say that are genetic in origin?
Such as?
Do you think, for example, that if there was a gene, and let's bring it to the theoretical domain so that we can agree, and then let's bring it into the real domain.
Sure,
if there was a gene that makes you totally unable to become an engineer. Let's say that you have no spatial brain. You are unable to make mathematical calculation. Do you think that this gene would influence your socioeconomic position in the world eventually?
If you're asking me if like a certain race of people have a gene that literally like cuts off a third of their brain, then yes, obviously this would lead to material differences in their participation in society. But I reject preemptively any argument you're going to make that the reason why Black people are poor in this country is because their lower IQs and bumpy skulls led to them living in ghettos.
Okay, well, that is a straw man, but I think you agreed with as much as I want to convince you that socioeconomic realities are biological realities.
No, that's highly reductive. Socioeconomic realities are socioeconomic realities, and biological realities are socioeconomic realities sometimes too. People's IQ correlates very fucking heavily with their level of education. The idea, like these two things influence one another all the time. That's why it's so difficult to distinguish what are environmental and genetic factors, which is why no reputable geneticist has ever come out and published any study indicating that there is a causative relationship between race and a person's IQ. It has never been done. I mean, well, I guess it was done a century and a half ago off bunk data. I mean, we have the bell curve, but nowadays, no academic backs that prospect up. The most we can do is make correlative arguments and try to ascertain the extent to which environment influences outcome.
Well, I would disagree with the statement. There are some academics, Edward Dutton, Charles Murray, even
Charles Murray. Yeah, I know. I said reputable academics.
Okay, so I'm not a reputable academic.
You were literally you were literally kicked out of your university for multiple sexual harassment claims. No, I don't think you're particularly reputable when it comes to this subject.
I've left my university out of choice. There was no harassment claim in that university.
All right. Well, I left Twitch out of choice too. I voluntarily picked up my bags and decided to leave Twitch after after my comments there. No, like, but like seriously though, I've engaged in like a meta-analysis study of all this. There's a lot of really interesting data on the subject, but there was absolutely no backed hard, like nothing in Nature, nothing in American Science or American Scientific, like no hard like dissertation on the idea that we have found the causative link. Now there are a lot of people on the fringes of academia who are making these cases, and these people all seem to have weird relationships with neo-Nazi groups, which is really strange. It makes it seem like they have like a motivated reasoning going into it, and the reason they publish their like academic articles in junk journals that don't require peer review is because they know they wouldn't hold up to the scrutiny of real journals. So like that's my main issue. Every time when I looked like at the race realism stuff, because fucking not Ryan Falk, the alt hype guy, messaged me a while ago, or like did a video on me a while ago. So I decided to do a bunch of research on this, and it was really frustrating because at the end of it, it all comes down to anti-intellectualism. It all has to come down to the premise of, well, the reason why media and academia isn't reporting on the truth is because they're run by Jews or something. That was pretty much like at the end of the road, that's the evidence that you get to. Like that's the final argument. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, we're down to an appeal to authority or an evaluation of the authority and their quality. I don't really care about this. In the end, I denied the boundary between nature and nurture. I denied the boundary between genetic effects and environmental effects. In fact, I believe that in every environmental effect that you could think of, I might be able to find a gene that could affect this environmental effect. For example, people call the environmental effect parental skills. I think parental skills might very well be influenced by genes for various emotions, various brain structures. And so in my view, the entire world is a mix of genetic influences and influences that come from outside the body.
It goes both ways, though. It goes both ways because genetic factors can also be a product of your environment. That's why IQ doesn't actually determine general intelligence, because if it did, it wouldn't change when you get an education. That's why West Africans have the sickle cell anemia shit. It has nothing to do with their African genes. It has to do with the environment they lived in. When they got shipped over to America, they got that trait was removed. A genetic trait no longer exists in a population because the environment is no longer there to incentivize the production of that trait. It's reciprocal, and that's what makes this research so difficult, right? That's why nobody can make like any hard causative arguments. But if you want, like we can reduce this down to like moral claims. If you agree that environment affects genetics, which you would have to, wouldn't you agree the best thing we can do is try to meet environmental parity so everyone has the best possible chance to maximize their genetic potential?
Absolutely interesting. I agree that the environment influences the genes because the theory of evolution essentially says that. I'm a biologist and I believe in it. So yes, the environment evolves genes. It selects genes. It favors certain genes. Then the question becomes, you essentially want to create a biodome. You're a social engineer. You want to change the world by equalizing the environments.
Yeah.
I don't think it follows from the fact that the current environments are that white people and black people are responding differently to the United States environment. We could frame it that way, frame the problem that way. I don't think it follows that if we equalize the environment, we will equalize the genes.
Well, we have to test that, right? Like, we can't know for sure unless we actually introduce racial parity. Hey, listen, I'll tell you, we can undergo that experiment together. Hey, listen, if you're interested in finding out the extent to which racial differences are genetic, and I'm interested in racial equality, the best thing we can do is get rid of racism, because that would A, clear up any confounding variables for your research, and B, make me happy because it would lead to a greater general increase in happiness. Like, we should share a goal in that.
Very interesting. And I have to say, this is one of the most productive discussions I've had with a leftist. And thank you for your good faith there. I think it's interesting. But here's my problem. In the process of equalizing environment, are you going to take money from me and give it to black people?
I mean, I would redistribute wealth from the wealthy to the poor, but that has nothing to do with race. I mean, Obama's pretty wealthy too, right? Like, I'll yoink his paycheck too.
Yes. So essentially, your equalizing of the environment is impeding on my liberty. And that is a big problem to me. We can't live together.
Are taxes an infringement on your liberty?
Absolutely. Every dollar of taxes is an infringement of my liberty.
Well, hey, if we use taxes to bring about racial parity and black people and white people have approximately the same household income, then it would no longer be racially discriminatory and black and white people would be taxed the same amount, right?
That is the very naive view, but I don't believe that even leftists are so naive as to believe this. What we are currently seeing in the relationship between races in the United States is a feeling of entitlement. And the same is within the domain of sex and LGBT rights. It is that we are faced with a population that is demanding more than just their liberty of being. The same way LGBT people they are demanding more than just being LGBT and being left alone.
What are they demanding?
Well, in Canada, for example, they are demanding access to children. They are demanding
what does that mean?
Propaganda material being distributed to children. And they are demanding also that they are demanding that the opinion of people like me be censored.
Okay.
People like other.
I just want to go through one at a time because sometimes there is some crazy shit from the LGBT community. Okay, so I just want to go through it one at a time.
Okay.
So by access to children, what do we mean by that?
We mean, for example, the library system inviting trans people to be performing what some find to be sexually suggestive performances in front of the children.
Okay, so I want to draw a line here. I don't think there's anything wrong with drag queen story time or story hour. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. When I see pictures of this, it really just seems to be drag queens like just dressed up in costume. I don't think they tend to be that sexual, I guess, unless you I don't know like what you're into personally, but I don't.
At this point they are in with a pole dancer, apparently.
But that's not. Well, that's a different thing. That's not drag queen story time, is it? That's a different thing.
But then there is also performer that are drag queen story hour that have sexually suggestive bathing suit, just covering essentially a V shaped around their, I don't know what it is, vagina or penis.
This is the issue that I have with the alarmism though, right? Because you just conflated this like to me. So the drag queen story hour thing just seems like costume people reading to kids. I mean, that seems pretty innocuous, you know? There was one bit of drama when one of the people who was doing the drag queen story hour was found to be a previous sexual predator, and they were just immediately let go. It makes sense, like, this is like a volunteer thing. They're probably not going to do like formal background checks on everyone who signs up. When it comes to like doing pole dancing in front of kids, I agree that shit's pretty fucking cringy. I don't agree with that, and I don't agree with child drag queens either. This seems to me like an extremely small minority of the population that are, I guess, trying to hyper normalize like their social and behavioral preferences. By like bringing the whole family in, and I disagree with that stuff.
Exactly.
But I don't think that's like a LGBT thing. Like, keep in mind, straight people also have child beauty pageants, which I think are fucking disgusting. That shit goes on all across the U.S. Republicans would rather commit fucking seppuku than keep the 6-year-old girls from putting makeup on and dressing up and doing little dances in front of an audience. So I think this is more of an issue with people being inappropriate with kids than it is like LGBT people.
I agree there is inappropriateness outside, which is why my statement is more general and it's about entitlement. And in the end, let's not force parents to be making educational choices for their children that are in line with a socialist leftist order.
Wait, what's socialist?
As long as you leave me
leftist order?
In the sense that in line with the civil rights fight that some LGBT people perceive they are the soldiers of. As long as you let right-wing parents keep their children away from these influences, I'm actually fine with it existing in society.
Oh, no, fuck that. No, every kid has to learn about that. Yeah. Wait, isn't this just the same as don't teach my kids about gay people? Like, why is it any different?
Oh, well, I absolutely object to forced education on any subject. I think that the decision should come back to the parent.
Okay. All right. I don't think the parent should have a right to shelter their children from essential pieces of education that are included in a national curriculum. Because if you do that, you incentivize conservative parents from keeping their kids from hearing about stuff like sex education, which is very damaging to a child's upbringing to not know about that kind of stuff. And if they're gay or trans, which they might be statistically, you prevent them from understanding what they are, which can lead to much greater levels of like a social antagonism, confusion, sometimes even suicidality down the road. Educating kids in this stuff is sometimes literally a lifesaver.
Well, I think that we disagree here because the homeschool curriculum seems to be outperforming even professional teachers from the national education curriculum. So from this perspective, children that emerge from homeschool milieu, they are performing better, they are happier, they are wealthier.
But so that's it. They're wealthier. Don't you think that means they can benefit more from tutorship? See, homeschooling, that's some white suburb Karen shit. You think the average kid in Section 8 housing is going to be able to be homeschooled? Probably not. I think you might be selecting for wealth here. If we actually flatten out the levels of education, it wouldn't surprise me if homeschooling actually left severe gaps in a child's education.
Well, my point is not let's impose homeschooling on everyone. My point is as long as you're here telling me that you will impede on my liberty to homeschool, we can't live together and we are political enemies. And I'm trying to eliminate from my nation people like you.
Yeah, that's the bad thing. That's what I'm trying to prevent from loony Nazis keeping their kids from understanding what gay people are. Like, I'm trying to prevent that. Yeah, I think you guys are like a material harm to society. I'm just trying to teach kids factual information. Like that's my goal.
Yeah, well, make your own kids and teach them your information. As far as I'm concerned, there will be a pushback one day against this feeling of entitlement.
They said that about gay people and it hasn't happened.
What?
They said that about gay people being taught to kids in school, and it hasn't happened. This is always the threat of the reactionary. Like, you keep pushing us, we're going to snap. But not really. Like, you guys just complain about this civil rights issue, and then you all die, and the next generation of you reactionaries complains about the next one, and then you all die. Oh. Like, yeah, that's just the progress of history.
We are in a multi-generational struggle, and the left and the right are in a fight that is multi-generational. On the side of the right wing, there is that we make more babies than you guys. And so eventually in the future, we'll probably have more right-wingers to be keeping that fight up.
Why can't we just get along, JF? Why can't we just get along? I don't, because that's the difference. I don't want to hurt you. But I don't want to hurt you. I want us to get along.
On my liberties.
Wait. By taxing and by making sure your kids are like adhere to a curriculum that is nationally maintained?
Yeah, because your national maintainer is bad.
But you can't make those arguments. That's why you haven't been making those arguments. Every single time I have that argument, oh, it's bad to teach kids about this or that, the person who's debating me loses. There's a reason why this is national curriculum. This didn't get entered in as part of some crazy radical SJW agenda. It got entered in because every institution disagrees with you. It's settled science. So that's not the argument you want to have. I
don't even know what it is that you're disagreeing with me because I've not stated it. My point to you is parents should have the liberty to determine their own curriculum, and it may involve values that would be not taught at all in public schools. As long as we can't agree on this, we are in a war.
Okay, wait. So you said earlier you have an issue with like the pole dancing shit in front of kids, right? Which I do too, so.
Yes.
Okay. One of the reasons why I don't like that is because I think exposing children to that and putting children in that environment opens them up to predatory intentions. So you, a person with your history, is talking about making a bunch of kids, keeping them close to your vest, sheltering them from political information you don't like, so you can weaponize them in a culture war against people you don't like. So my issue is with predatory behavior, JF. And that's the issue why, that's the reason why I'm not a big fan of homeschooling as you describe it. Because it seems to me like it's not being done for the benefit of children. It's being done as a way for you to weaponize your political beliefs in some sort of grand civilizational war against people who believe in science.
Now, the day we will attain peace between my side of the political spectrum and yours is when you can say exactly what you just said but about the left and about how you are predating for children. You are injecting Marxist beliefs in their brain,
but it's
using
just
your
science.
Marxist professors
It's just science.
educated in Marxist colleges. This is what you're doing. What you
but
just said
do you understand
is exactly
how delusional?
what you've been doing for 40 years.
Do you understand how delusional you are? Do you seriously think that teaching people the science about transgender people is Marxist propaganda? This is why it's impossible to take, like, this is why I said, like, you're not a credible researcher, because this degree of demagoguery is delusional. Marxism has nothing to do with the educational curriculum of the United States. The United States fucking hates Marxism. I didn't learn anything about Marx until I got to college, and I had to have a cool professor slip me some book recommendations. This isn't some grand Jewish, I know you're at least adjacent to the JQ shit. This isn't some grand, like, multicultural Jewish conspiracy. This is just science and social awareness moving to a point you're uncomfortable with. But the sane thing to do at that point is to examine your biases rather than assuming it's a conspiracy to rob you of your children and of your liberty. I don't want to rob you of anything. I just want people to be prevented. I want children to be safe from abuse, and I want people to basically be informed on basic factual information. Like, that's it. That's the only thing I really care about.
I think you're assuming stuff about me that I never said, and you probably don't know me enough, but I'm not against teaching children the science of transsexualism. I'm totally fine with it. But there's science, and then there's the morality of it, and there's the value of it, and the religious position on it. You are telling me that I should not teach children some aspect of the religious traditions with respect to these sexual behaviors. I'm telling you, by doing so, you're impeding on my liberty. You feel entitled to not only your children, but to teach stuff to the children of others.
What do you want to teach them?
Whether there is a Marxist program in our public schools, I think it's so laughable that even on your own regular chat, I see people telling you, even a super chat telling you that you're wrong. Yes, cultural Marxism exists. Yes, there is a push for it from the top down, from the universities to the colleges to the elementary schools.
That super chat was preceded by Give Dicks Re, and they were donating so they could use the Dicks emote in my chat. I don't know if that was like a super serious endorsement of the cultural Marxist theory. So yeah, okay. So I don't know how to address this directly, because the idea that American academia, which doesn't even like teach shit about global warming, which still teaches kids that that the war between the North and the South was about states' rights, I don't know if this is like a cultural Marxist institution. But here's the problem that I have: you keep insinuating that you don't have an issue with the factual information about transgender people, but then you say the curriculum that's delivering it is biased and cultural Marxist. I can only assume you mean the moral predispositions of our academic systems are cultural Marxist in nature, to which I must ask you, what religious traditional values regarding trans people would you teach your kids in lieu of the education system?
Well, I'm an atheist, so zero.
I thought you said religious. Sorry, like your traditional values.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I do fight for the rights of religious people, religious parents, to be able to say, I disagree with the homosexual lifestyle. It's a statement that we can't say anymore, apparently, in our world. I mean, literally in Canada, you can say it. In the US, you can still say it, but you might get in trouble. It's unbelievable.
Well, wait, that's so believable. Why do you hate gay people?
There's no hating here.
I'm sorry. I misspoke. Why do you? What are you disagreeing with? Like just them, like the sodomy thing? Because like you can do sodomy with girls too. Is it like two boys like liking each other? Because like straight guys can like what's the thing? You know?
What I'm fighting for is the right of parents to be investing efforts in children that they will educate and they will express to them the importance of heterosexual reproduction, penis to vagina, sperm to egg, production of babies.
But everyone knows
it is a tradition that is necessary to the maintenance of the human species, and I believe it is the right of a parent to say, I prefer that you engage in this behavior.
Why should a parent be able to force sexual preferences on their kids? That's
I've
really
not said
creepy.
Forced. I've said that they should
be
able
impose.
to express. No, I've not said imposed. I've said express. I think that they should be able to express their preference for heterosexual reproduction.
Okay, so wait, let me be clear, just so we can back up on this. Okay, if you, let's say, so you're, I feel I just have to check. You're straight, I assume.
Yes, I fuck women.
Okay, yeah. Hey, me too. Another thing we have in common. Okay, so let's say you were born, I don't know, 35 years ago. I don't know how old you are. 35 years ago, you were born to two gay parents. They adopted you or something, I guess. Or maybe it's two lesbian parents, one of them gave birth. I don't know. I don't care.
Well, I already denied this premise. You cannot be born from gay parents.
Wait, I just said, wait. I just said like they adopted, or if it's a lesbian couple, okay, like they would have been artificially inseminated.
They would have adopted me.
Sure, yeah. Okay, you were raised by two gay parents, I guess. And okay. Yeah. And they have a preference for their lifestyle in the same way you have a preference for your lifestyle. So they don't want you going to school. They don't want you taking sex education because they don't want you to learn about how good it feels to put your pee-pee in a vagina. They don't want you to be interested in girls. They will constantly broadcast like homosexual propaganda, like, I don't know, what, Steven Universe? I don't fucking know, some gay shit at you. And then when you start to express like tendencies towards straightness, they get mad at you. That's what you're talking about doing to your children. If your children are gay or trans, you're putting them in that position. Now, the problem with that is both of those situations are abusive. I think that fundamentally children have a right to live authentically as their true identity, and if their parents are involved in a political scheme to shelter them from information about who they could be and to impose on them a set of moral values about how it's degenerate to engage in anything other than dick to vagina heterosexual sex, you are wounding them in a way that I would consider abuse, just in the same way I would consider it abusive for that aforementioned gay couple to do that to you.
Well, I believe that you've made a false equivalent here. You are comparing two things. The situation you described for the dictatorial homosexual couple that you referred to is not what I described. All I said is the homosexual couple should be able to express their preference for homosexuality, and the heterosexual couple should be able to express their preference for heterosexuality. And in the end, I know who will win. In the long run, heterosexual couples are those
what do you mean win?
Win the struggle for existence.
There's no wait. We're not fighting. Gay people have been around for hundreds of thousands. No, we're not. Gay people and straight people are fighting. Nazis and normal people are fighting. That's your fight, my dude. Gay and straight people get along just fine.
Just existing as a reproductive
you can just exist.
Agent.
You there's no harm.
No. Listen to me, Vach. Listen to this one. It's a good one.
All right.
It comes from a PhD in biology and neuroscience.
All right, I'm ready to hear the PhD talk.
The fact of existing as a living reproductive organism puts you in a struggle for existence, no matter whether you like it or not, no matter whether you acknowledge it or not. The fact is, we are all in a race toward the future formed by genes trying to make copies of themselves. And I know exactly who wins between the heterosexual couple and the homosexual couple.
I can't believe I heard this from a biologist. Like, this is wrong on so many levels. The only struggle that individuals, individual engages in is for their biological reproductive success. Group preference and group success is formed by social ties, not a biological reality. And you're presupposing the idea that there's a gay gene. Gay people have been a part of human society for as long as we have written records of them. Like, even if right now you genocided every single person more than a 1 on the Kinsey scale across the country, across the planet, the next generation would have the same percentage of gay people. So there isn't, this would be like saying like you're waging like an evolutionary struggle against like left-handed people. Like, they're just going to keep coming back and they're not hurting you and they're not doing anything. They're just picking shit up with their left hand.
I disagree with your statements. If you were, I mean, to be clear, I'm not advocating for genocide. I think we should clarify this because we're on YouTube. It's really not my goal to be making people disappear of any characteristics. Okay?
You said you're going to win the war. You're going to win out. What does that mean?
No. No, all I'm saying is that there is a frequency in the population of certain genes, and some of them will end up disappearing, some of them will end up dominating. What we know is that if there is a strong enough pressure for evolution, it will happen no matter what. It doesn't even matter if the current society, if in current society, gayness is associated with genes, it doesn't matter because genes will evolve in the future to make you not gay.
Why? But why?
There's currently
Wait, why?
no genes for gayness.
There's no evidence. Yeah, why? Why would genes evolve to make people not gay? No, you can't. Listen, you're a biologist. You're a PhD. You have more education than me. Why would you ever make the argument that just because a trait exists that doesn't have as high a percentage as representation as another trait means that it's going to be genetically bred out? You're presupposing so many things. The idea that it's genetically tied, the idea that these genetic ties are ones that are passed down rather than mutations of existing genes that are in all of us. What's funny is if you socially suppressed gay people, by your theory, if gayness is a gene, all the gay people would go in the closet and pretend to be straight and they'd fuck women and make kids that would have a higher predisposition to being gay. If anything, letting gay people just be out and about fucking one another in the ass makes it far more likely they're not going to end up reproducing it by your theory of gay geneness, because when doing that, they're less likely to bring those genes down to the next generation. There's no war. There's no struggle. How are gay people hurting you?
No. You're absolutely right, Vaush. This is why I do not advocate for any sort of impediment on the liberties of gay people.
Do you know the difference between positive and negative liberty?
Let's initiate me to it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a really common concept in discussions amongst libertarians, and I'm an anarchist, of course, so I fit in that purview. Like negative liberty is, I actually might have these backwards, but the essential distinction is this: negative liberty is there is nothing impeding you from doing what you want to do. No taxes, no laws, no government regulations, nothing. Whereas positive liberty is maximizing the ability for the individual to do the things that they want. So whereas negative liberty means I won't, no laws, no interference, whatever. Positive liberty means actively, in some cases, interfering to bring up people's realm of potential. And I believe you are interfering with the positive liberty of gay people if you have children and you're trying to remove them from understanding the science and the reality of gay and transgender people, because what you're doing is contributing to social forces that lead to discrimination against those groups, thus impeding their liberty.
Okay, well, on the side of negative and positive liberty, I will point out at a more abstract level that positive liberty will often involve farming from others unconsensually their efforts or services or wealth. And I disagree with it. In other words, I disagree with taking wealth from someone to create opportunities for someone else, unless it is consensual. On the question of, you're coming back to the straw man that I advocate for depriving children of science. I don't. I'm a scientist. I'm actually a science educator, and I love science education. What I'm saying is we must let parents decide the moral systems in which they want to bring up their children. And if it's the public school, then so be it. But I'm not fine with impeding on people's ability to teach morals the way they intend it and the way they see it to their children. It is not abuse to say, I have an opinion. It is not abuse to say, I think that God wants us to do A, B, C. Those are not acts of abuse, and you guys on the left
absolutely can be. They absolutely can be. I can litmus test you on this. If you have a gay kid and you're religious and you tell that kid that gay people are going to hell and he needs to do everything he can to burn the sin out of him, is that abuse to you?
I guess that in the way you phrased it, yes, because there is an induction of fear.
Okay. What about a household in which a child is gay, but they don't know it yet, or they're just starting to realize it, and they know for a fact that their parents have a moral predisposition against the existence of gay people?
Can you repeat this one? It's a complex one.
Of course, yeah. If you have a kid, like a, I don't know, 5 or 6 year old, whatever, who's gay, but they're only just realizing it. They're only just realizing they're gay. And they know for a fact that their parents have a predisposition morally against the existence of gay people, that they don't like gay people, they prefer heterosexual couples. Do you consider that abuse?
No, it is not an act of abuse. It happens in the brain of the child.
Okay. All right. Well, I consider stuff like emotional abuse to also be abuse, but yeah, okay. That could just be me want to protect
I need a
children.
positive action to point toward abuse. I need something that the parents have done. In the example you gave, it was just the feeling of guilt emerging in the child's mind. And guilt is a thing, but it's not an act of abuse.
Well, I mean, guilt can be a mechanism through which you engage in a fuck ton of abuse against kids. I would say that guilt is one of the most exploitable emotions that you can use to hurt children. Because children are emotionally dependent on their parents. If you put kids in a position where they feel as though their identity is disappointing to the parents, that can ruin them for the rest of their lives.
Well, in that case, there was no positive action that the parents have done to exploit this.
Okay, so you don't care about abuse, you care about technicalities to absolve you of guilt for trying to potentially abuse your kids. Okay. Yeah, can we talk for a little bit? How are gay people hurting you?
The gay people are not hurting me.
You said there's a war.
Oh, there's a reproductive war. I mean, there's a war between the squirrels in the park to be the fathers of the next squirrels in the park. So it's not the kind of war that you think. It's not a war with bazookas, but there is a war, an evolutionary struggle to represent the next generation, to leave some imprint on planet Earth. And it is a war that everyone is involved in, no matter whether they know it or not.
Are we talking about a culture war? Because like we can't make the argument that like genetically like gay people are trying to outbreed straight people. That would be lunacy. Like if we're making the argument that there's a culture war, then I would agree with that. Would you agree with that like description?
There is definitely a culture war, but it was not the war I was talking about. I was talking about the evolutionary struggle. It's a struggle in numbers. It's a struggle of outcompeting, outpopulating. And it's actually not impossible from the perspective of the theory of evolution that certain genes, even for homosexuality, would be competing in that struggle because the genes may be, for example, encoding like sassy behavior in females favoring their reproduction, and when they find themselves in a male, they start penetrating each other in the ass. It's absolutely viable.
Okay, and maybe viable in like in a very silly Dungeons and Dragons stat campaign. I will concede I haven't done much research on the transmission of the sassy gene from the female to the male, which makes them want to take it in the ass, but I will, I guess, brush up on my research on that one.
It's one of the serious current evolutionary theory of homosexuality.
All right. Yeah, I guess I can't really follow that one exactly. When I think of like a broader struggle between like straightness and gayness, I tend to think of more of a cultural thing. What will the future look like? Will it look like Nazi Germany, like with a bunch of tradcon relationships and every mom has 18 babies because they're trying to like build up the white race? Or is it going to be more of like a free, like liberal society? You claim to care a lot about liberalism, or at least liberty as a concept.
Yes.
Yeah. So I feel like your interest would be building a society in which people have the maximum amount of freedom to pursue their desired life states, no?
Yes, but with a caveat, which is that there are certain freedoms that you ultimately deny other freedoms. And so everything is a balance. For example, you could want an open border society. That would be very much freedom, so much freedom, in fact, that everyone can enter your country. I say if you do that, you have the problem that people come in your country and change it to the point where you don't have your liberties anymore. So that's a problem to me. So
wait,
a balance of freedom.
But how is that? I mean, here in the United States of America, most of the immigrants in this country are Democrats, which means they're actually increasing the total amount of freedom in this country. Where's the idea that like, wouldn't it be better to just let people come and go as they want and then try and protect some like certain values you care about, like freedom and liberty and the First Amendment and stuff like that, rather than block people off from entering the country?
In a democracy, that's impossible. The problem being you have more migrants. They come in, they vote Joe Biden along with you, and you get Joe Biden. And yeah, so it's a problem. So
wait, how's that a problem? Yeah, riding with Biden, baby. How's that a problem?
Yeah. The problem is that the government of the US, and I include the states and the federal government, is growing and growing since 80 years, and it keeps growing.
But it grows
And
more
to
into
the point,
Republicans than Democrats, so wouldn't voting for Biden help? Trump has massively expanded the deficit, military expenditures. I feel like by voting for Democrat, you're actually preventing the growth of the government, if anything.
yeah, I mean, I actually have as much problems with the Republicans as with the Democrats on this question. I believe that they are all bureaucrat, technocrats who are growing the state, and it's harming liberty because it's less dollars in my pocket, more dollars in the centrally controlled and democratically controlled government. By the way, I object to democracy.
No, I know. So I know you don't actually care about liberty. You were just saying you did earlier. You can't say I care about liberty with one caveat. I don't care about voting. That's literally liberty. Like that's the most liberty thing there is. But I know.
No,
I'm aware.
When you vote, you are applying laws on someone else. That's not a liberty. That's an impediment.
And when you have a monarchy, you're imposing your dictatorial will on a population.
Absolutely. So I combat monarchy just as much as I combat democracy because I think it's not better to be ruled by a king than it is to be ruled by a bunch of idiots.
What system of government do you advocate for?
I advocate for a form of libertarian nationalism, anarchism, somewhere along those lines.
So no central government, but corporations get to do what they want, or?
Well, there could be something like a central government. I'm a minarchist, so I believe in a very small central government that could instaurate a minimum of order.
It's a very small central government that does the two most authoritarian things governments do, which is manage the police and manage the military.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a liberty system right here. Liberty in this system seems like I hope you become a CEO, or otherwise you're pretty much just left, you're beholden to all the power structures you have no place in. I think that people should have a place in every power structure they're a part of. From their workplace to the government they live in, I think everyone should get like, a representation in every like higher order social structure that they're a part of. That's my goal.
Well, you are an example of the left's entitlement that I criticized. You feel entitled to have jobs, or to have some people have jobs.
Yeah, I have entitlement to have freedom.
That way.
Wait, I'm entitled to freedom. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. What about the freedom of the employer not to hire you?
What about the freedom of the slave master? If a person's freedom is to act unethically, I say we take that freedom away from them because they're extracting freedom from others. What about my freedom to rape like little girls? Like that's a freedom, but I'm taking away the freedom of others by violating their rights. I think you're doing the same thing when you own a traditionally operated business. You're enforcing effectively an autocratic social system that people have to participate in, or they lose their jobs and then their health care.
Well, your fallacy here is to think that the employment relationship is extortionist in nature. It is not. People have the choice to go live in the forest if they want, just grow a little
Is
garden.
that a good system, though? Like, hey, if you think this fundamental economic system is unethical, like you can go live in the woods and like suck nourishment from like chestnuts that you're roasting over a bonfire?
That's exactly what I was doing today. I was planting trees because I want my own fruits to grow. Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, well, you have the freedom to do that, sure. And I think people should have the freedom to work in workplaces that aren't autocratic, too.
Well, by doing this, you're denying an employer freedom, which is fundamental to me. So that's where we disagree.
But that's the thing. You're doing my argument because I would say, you, like a libertarian leaning person would say, I think it's fucked up how the government can tax me. And I can say, lol, just move. And you would say, well, there are social and economic factors that would prevent me from just departing this country. I have roots history here. It's not very like incentivized for me to do so. And then I say, hey, we should probably take care of this incredibly unethical, like hierarchical business structure. And you can say, well, you should just move. Like, it's the same basic thing. I care about positive liberty. And to me, the liberty of a few 100,000 people in this country to make obscene amounts of money off the exploitation of their workers is worth infinitely less than the liberty of every American to be able to have a say in the workplaces that they're a part of. That to me is liberty.
I get that. And whenever, I mean, it's almost inevitable that people like you will take over America, which is why I'm not a libertarian.
Hey, thank you.
Stand your ground.
I appreciate that.
I'm not a stand your ground libertarian. I'm a run and hide libertarian. Run and hide from the communist. Run and hide from Vermin Supreme and from Vash.
But we don't want you to leave. But you can stay here. I would like it if you stop being like Nazi adjacent, but you can live a free and happy life with the greatest amount of personal autonomy possible.
Just the way you use the word adjacent here, I don't want to live any close to you. I want to live 500 kilometers away from you at all times for the rest of my life.
Do you take issue with adjacent, or do you just want me to call you like a Nazi?
Yes.
I don't know for sure if you go with like the JQ stuff. I know the rest of your beliefs are pretty like.
I take major issue with your use of the word adjacent. It shows a weakness of character inside of you where you can't really commit to a full attack, and so you label people in a very feminine way. I have to say, you are doing it in a. You are trying to spread a label that you put on me, and you can't even stand by the label, so you add adjacent to it.
Well, that would be the label,
because
Nazi
you don't even have
like
the balls to stand by your dirty label.
Wait. I was just trying not to be like inaccurate. First of all, I can't believe that a fucking Frenchman is calling me feminine. So first, like, step off, okay? And second of all, with regards to that, like, if you want me to just call you a Nazi, like, I can.
By the way, that was a racial microaggression.
I know. I'm sorry. I take it back, okay? Me and the Frenchies get along. I've got French friends, okay? But with the, like, to me, the label is Nazi adjacent. To me, being within 500 kilometers of being a Nazi is pretty bad in and of itself. If you want me to just call you a Nazi, I can. I don't know the extent to which you do the Jew thing. I know that you kept calling Destiny a Jew when you debated him. Most of my understanding of your content comes from the debates that you've had with him, because I came from his community. I don't know if that was you, like, misfiring, or if, like, there was, like, some substantial, like, you believed Destiny was part of, like, a big, like, multicultural conspiracy. I don't know. But if you want to commit to that position, I can just call you a Nazi. I'm not trying to do it to, like, insult you or anything. I think your views are reprehensible. Like, you're literally like the rot of society. I just want everyone to be, like, free and happy, including you, even though I disagree with you and think your values are abhorrent. But I feel like every time I talk with people with your political predisposition, like, openly, they're like, hey, I don't want to do any violence or anything, but, like, I know what you guys want. When you guys talk about degenerates in your fucking 8chan threads, like, I know what you guys actually want. So I don't really think that we're the threat here. If we end up taking over America, I hope that it would be as part of a movement that includes you. Well, you're Canadian. I'm sorry. Sorry. North America. Yeah.
But I kind of feel like an American because I lived there 5 years. It won't happen because you are denying liberties, and you don't understand what you're ruining from the capitalist system and what you cannot recreate in a socialist system. So by the time you have taken over the entirety of society, there will be no more wealth to be run after. There will be no more production. There will be no more dream, no more creativity. And you will essentially impoverish, just like it happened in other places where socialism has taken over. You will impoverish society because you feel entitled to other people's decision, work, phenotype, wealth, whatever it is.
The irony
system is bad.
The irony of a capitalist telling me I feel entitled to other people's work is truly astounding. Well, wait, wouldn't this work out in your interest, though? Because if I take over America and I turn it into a wealth-deprived hellhole, then all the brown, scary immigrants wouldn't want to come in from the rest of the world, and then it would, like, be more of a white ethno-state, right?
So you're claiming you're strawmanning me certainly here, but you're saying that there will be no interest to immigration if you take over and make a socialist world. Well, to the contrary, I think that what we see in Sweden, for example, is that the more the country becomes socialist, the more it attracts migrants.
Wait, but there are multiple things wrong with that. First of all, they're not socialists. Second of all, you just said that socialism led to the destruction of a country, whereas Sweden's only been going up, up, up. And third of all, Sweden's been getting more capitalist since the mid-70s. And that's when the migrant crisis happened. Like every premise that you've lined out there falls flat. Now, mind you, I like immigrants, so I'd like them to come in.
Well, yeah, you kind of strawman me there. All I'm saying about Sweden and other countries of Europe is that the more social welfare services they've been offering over long periods of time, the more they have been attracting migrants.
Okay.
Of course, there are other factors like planes and travel being available. But yeah, I mean, I think that socialism attracts migrants because it is a world in which they can essentially benefit from a kickstart in life that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
I think that's
But I
beautiful.
think that ultimately, yeah, it's a system that is exploitative of the rich, and it misdirects money. Really, it misdirects the reward that was supposed to be owned by the rich, and that is now redistributed to people who have not demonstrated an ability to handle it, to manage it properly.
Okay. So your anti-democracy tendencies are really showing here. But that's okay. If you hold to that value, like, I'm not going to try and push you on it.
Yeah.
We can talk about this, okay? Listen, I'm an anarchist. I care about open borders, but I know that open borders are a long-term goal. It's not something that we can do immediately. Because if we did, what you described would happen. America's got a lot of money in it. We probably couldn't handle 20 million people coming in every year. Probably not. I don't think we could. So why don't we talk about, rather than like decrying immigration as a whole, why don't we talk about the process of managing a welfare and immigration system that maximizes the gains of both immigrants and of the domestic population. It's funny that you say immigrants come in and they steal from the rich when all available data shows that immigrants, even the poor ones, actually increase the wealth of the wealthiest people more than any other group of people. After all, when those poor immigrants come in, they're going to be, in many places across the world, being paid shit fucking wages because they don't know the language and don't have the social like support to negotiate like better wages. They don't have the skills for like higher paying jobs, which means that a greater amount of surplus labor will be skimmed from the shit that they do, which means the wealthy people get wealthier. That's one of the reasons why Nazis always say that I'm a capitalist for supporting open borders, because all these big libertarian foundations that only give a fuck about all of the they getting wealthy are very much in favor of immigration. So like, the wealthy benefit from immigration. The only people who don't benefit are the very, very poor people within this country already. So if we engage in redistributive policies, we might be able to compensate for that and try to rebalance things. And hey, look at that. Immigrants coming in made everyone wealthier, and it made the immigrants happy, which is also nice, you know?
Well, I don't even deny that in certain scenarios you could have an injection of wealth coming from a migrant population. I would be very surprised that we have generated massive amounts of wealth by immigration. I think that I object to immigration on a demographics basis
I know.
and on a cultural. Yeah, so I don't really care about the economics. You may tell me, Jeff, you could increase your GDP and annual salary by 12.6% next year if you accept certain immigrants. I don't give a shit.
Yeah,
really.
But this is what happens every time. Like you people will say like, oh, it hurts like the people in their country, and then mathematically it doesn't. You're like, oh, well, I just don't like brown people. You opened by saying that it was unfair for immigrants because they leech off the welfare system and because they take money away from wealthy people. That was your opening argument. You're the one who moved this to an economic place. If you want to talk about culture and demographics, we can go that direction too, but that's more moral than empirical.
My statement is social welfare attracts more immigration. It was not that they will not eventually become workers or anything, or that they won't participate to the economy. So be careful with the strawman there. As far as my opposition to immigration, it is one of demography. It is one of separate evolution. I believe that the people of Europe and Africa and Asia have evolved in separate systems, environments, and they are different enough so that these differences matter at the behavioral, at the political, at the social level. And I believe that the same way as I was planting tree, we are keeping per breeds of trees. We are growing certain plum to be of a certain color and different from other plums. I believe that we can do the same with humans, and that it might be a better way to live because of the political, social, behavioral differences between the peoples. Now, if people want to make a multiculturalist utopia somewhere, I don't really object. But what I object to is, again, the entitlement of people saying not only we want to create a multiculturalist utopia, but you're going to have to live with us and we're going to impose it on you. Why not let white people who want to live among each other and reproduce among each other, why not let them do it?
You
Is
can.
that so terrible?
You can't. I'm white. I could go and find some white suburb with my streamer money and find some white bitch and impregnate her and have 18 white children. The entitlement comes from you, who thinks that just because you're racist, you get to lock off an entire country to suit your demographic interests. That's the entitlement.
I've not locked off anyone.
But, hey, we can talk about these. So, first of all, gene variants. So, this is more your field of study than mine, but as I understand it, the total range of genetic variants amongst members of the African population of today have more variants amidst them than you would see in the average difference between people of different races. That is to say, when we talk about racial distinctions between groups and the genetic distinctions, we're usually not talking about these very separate, distinct, like locked off things. We're talking about overlapping lines of incredibly synonymous genome and phenotypical expression. Usually what this means is that researchers who actually seriously talk about race refer to clines rather than race. Race is a highly unscientific term, whereas clines refers to a broader pattern, a spectrum of genetic variants that encompasses pretty much all human variation on the planet, with the exception of obviously very rare genetic conditions or whatever. What this suggests to me is that there honestly is not that much genetic variation amongst people of different races. Not only are races, the lines between them, designated arbitrarily, nobody can argue that, and I know you don't argue that because I've seen a video where you agree that it's an arbitrary line, but no serious researcher even takes the idea of hard lines, no matter their arbitrary placement, seriously. Second of all, with regards to the cultural argument, so the idea that we're too genetically different to mingle is just not true. With regards to the cultural argument, which is the one that I take most issue with, culture is a product of environment, not genetics. I grew up in Los Angeles, very multicultural city. I grew up with black and brown people, Hispanic, Chinese, Korean, whatever. And all these people shared a lot in common with me. As long as they were second-generation immigrants, aka they were born here, I got along with them just fine. Do you think that these people, like a black man who lived next to me in fucking Beverly Hills, had more in common with me or with the African nation from which he descended? I would be willing to bet probably me, considering he only spoke English and in honestly a pretty aggressive twang as well. So the idea that there are these intrinsic cultural differences, if we want to address these cultural differences, we can't even look within race. I have cultural differences with white people who live in Alabama. My extended family comes from Florida. Every time I go down there, I feel like I'm talking to fucking aliens. I share a language with them, and that's about that. That's the extent of it. And they're my kin. I'm one generation removed from them. So when we talk about genetic variants, I don't think there's any evidence to indicate that this differentiates people in a meaningful way. And when we talk about culture, I don't think there's any evidence that this is meaningfully a product of genetic variants. So at the end of the day, I don't think there's any reason whatsoever to prefer white ethno-preferential nationalism or whatever.
Well, you prefer whatever you want, because in the end, I'm not denying your liberty to be creating a multicultural utopia with those who want to engage in this race mixing. Go ahead, have fun. There's a couple of things to be corrected here. At the beginning, you slid between the Lewontin fallacy and then the description of clines, and it's not really related. The fact that there's more genetic variants within Africa, that is one question, and it's the Lewontin fallacy. The fact is that it doesn't matter. There's just more races in Africa than there are elsewhere. So what? They are still different from the races in Europe. So the fact that there is variance within a category does not deny the existence of differences between categories. My favorite metaphor for this is cars versus trucks. There are many ways you can be a car, and the cars, they will differ in various models and make, and they will differ in lots of ways, so much so as to create more variability within the car category than there are between cars and trucks, because the difference between a car and a truck is pretty much always the same. So inner diversity does not exclude outer diversity as far as races go. Then you mentioned all sorts of experiences, cultural experiences with black people in Mississippi or whatever, and white people who differ. Yes, there is diversity within the white people, and so be it. It's great. and we should not combat it. We should let that diversity converge toward whatever natural state it converges toward.
That's my
and
argument.
The natural state. Yeah. Well, then we agree. The problem is there is currently a social pressure being put by the left for race mixing. And it's an attempt at social engineering. We can see Jesse NYC on Twitter, for example, a university professor who says, if you engage in white-to-white reproduction, you are part of the problem. You are part of white patriarchy, or whatever she called it. That's a problem to me. Let people decide whatever they want to do. And in their reproductive lives, what we find is that people have relatively important ethno-nationalist preference or ethnic preference for their own kind. So be it. Let the black people reproduce together if they want. Let the white people reproduce together if they want. And let those who want to race mix engage in it.
Okay, so I don't disagree with that. Nobody encourages forcing white people to fuck black people or anything.
Okay.
No,
excellent.
Yeah, of course. But we were talking about a white ethno state. If like individuals should be able to express their preferences however they want, I would never like force people to make those decisions. Now, I would say if you're white and you don't ever want to fuck a black person, you're probably fucking racist, and that is an issue. And I don't want that shit culturally to reproduce within my society. But that's not.
So you are.
Yes, I have a problem with race. Wait, no, hold on. I'm white. I could have a white wife and white babies if I wanted to. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if the reason why I want that white wife is because I'm racist, I would take issue with the racism, not the fact that I'm having sex with a person of my own race.
Okay. How do you identify racism? At which point of percentage of your exes are you a racist?
Oh, I don't like to speculate on that. I usually think my general experience is that racists are really fucking stupid, and usually they let it slip eventually. I don't think we need to do some hardcore like examination into their past to be able to determine whether or not they're racist. I mean, I guess if it's like really suspect shit.
What do we do with the racist? I mean, to be clear here, what you're saying is someone who has preferences for a certain race in his dating life is racist, and it's wrong, and you're gonna. What are you gonna do to these racists?
Wait, you can have preferences without it being racist. For example, I don't necessarily think that a white guy. This is usually an intra-racial thing rather than an interracial thing, or maybe the other. Yeah, no. Oh, sorry. This is usually an interracial thing rather than an intra-racial thing. But for example, if a white guy has like a specific preference for like black women or something, maybe it can be informed by racism. Maybe it's just like a phenotypical preference. I don't really care. I don't think it's inherently wrong. Usually, though, these preferences are borne out in more overt forms of racism, like a specific belief that like black people are inferior or something like that. And that would be what I would take issue with. And if I did find that a person was racist, not just that it was a white person who wanted a white wife or anything, but if they were actually overtly racist, I don't know. I mean, you could socially discourage that. I guess I wouldn't be friends with them. Like, I don't think there should be any state action against that.
Wonderful. Then it's okay. We can have preferences, because then I would have jumped to what about people who don't want to date trans people, who choose to date cisgender people systematically? Would they be bigot?
I'd say the same thing. There are some ways in which doing that can be like an indication of bigotry, but I think it's okay for people to have dating preferences. The normal argument that I make is this. If you say, I don't want to date a trans woman, and I ask why, you say like, oh, well, I don't like penises, I like vaginas. Okay, that's totally fine, whatever. But if we're talking about a trans woman who's transitioned and has had bottom surgery and who passes, there are some trans women out there who, like, even naked, like, they just completely pass, you know? Like, you would never know unless they told you. And if we met such a person, and then the guy is still like, oh, I still want to have sex with a trans woman, I have to ask them why, and they say, well, I just don't think I like trans people, that would probably be a product of bigotry. But even then, it's usually just like a squick feeling and not like overt hatred. So I probably wouldn't be like crazy mad, you know, but it's something I'd hope they would work on. I like to imagine that most of these social or cultural ills are things that individuals can work on internally, rather than something we can bully people out of. I think that most people, if given the right incentivizations, will eventually arrive at positions similar to mine. Maybe not economically, but socially at least.
Absolutely. That's why liberty is good. Let people decide for themselves, and a lot of things sort themselves out. I believe that in the sexual domain. I also believe that in the racial and employment domain. Let people be, and things will converge toward efficient worlds.
Well, let people be and discourage bigoted behavior. It's you have to do both, because otherwise the bigoted behavior will just run rampant in some communities. Don't want that. I also wanted to clarify when I speak of Kleins. So when I spoke of the genetic variance within the continent of Africa, I wasn't making the argument that this means there's no average genetic difference between different racial groups. What I was making the argument of is that when people think of races as like these distinct, segregated things, it's very easy to imagine them like being different species. But no. When we actually look at the total variance in genetic diversity amongst populations, there is a huge amount of overlap with like European and African and Middle Eastern and Asian people along the vast majority of like genome sequences for human beings. It would be like that, like you can find very commonly black people having more genetically in common with Europeans than they would with other black people from a different part of Africa, which suggests not that there are no differences, only that these differences are fairly minor and not as connected to skin color as we seem to think. And the last thing, but I think you would agree with that probably. And the last thing that I want to say is, what race mixing conspiracy is there? That's the last point I wrote down.
What race mixing conspiracy is there? Well, I mean, there is a problem in our society in the way corporations are incentivized by the state to make advertisings that involves race mixing rather than per breed couples, which does not correspond to the reality, but they are forced by the state very often because the state will impose a minimum of minority representation in public advertisements, or Facebook, for example, will not allow publicity that is directed directly at white people in certain domains like renting. And so it does cause problems. Those are It is, yeah, because it's illegal. Yeah, so Facebook blocks it because of the federal government, I believe. I don't understand the details, but in the end, what we find ourselves is all of these social media posts where you have publicities clearly always putting a black man with a white female, and it's starting to impede on people's sense that it is a legitimate thing to be a white male fucking a white female, and it's legitimate, and we must state it, we must stand for it, and we must combat the attack on this type of family that is currently being launched by the left.
So there's a lot of very loaded language here. So first of all, like, it's the government and it's also corporations, but it's also the left. I don't know if you know, but like the left is not in a position of prominence in the government or in higher corporate like superstructures. So if like,
well, from my perspective, it is, to be clear.
Okay. So by left you mean
are leftists.
So by left you mean progressive people then, like
statist, progressives, corporatist of the California oligopoly around tech.
This is a very inclusive This is the most inclusive thing you believe in, JF. It's the definition of left.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So all right. So the left. All right. Okay. So I don't think there is a conspiracy to push race mixing. What I think is, in many cases, progressives, so most of this comes from Hollywood, I think we can agree. Hollywood has a lot of progressive people that work there. Media and entertainment has always been a fairly progressive outlet, pretty much as long as these genres have existed. Even court jesters would make fun of the king. They were the only people who could get away with it, you know? And for that reason, they probably have a personal incentive to try to compensate for what they perceive to be broader systemic racism in this country. So most of America is still pretty fucking racist, you know? Most of America is still pretty locked into an old way of thinking here. And if we're talking about Hollywood, like, hey, you know, we're making these movies, we're making these characters, maybe it's a black guy and a white girl or vice versa or whatever. I don't think this is necessarily a harmful thing because I don't see any effort being made to discriminate or demonize like white couples. And I don't think that anyone is made to feel ashamed for being like white or having like a white partner or anything. Maybe in like the most obnoxious, hyper woke college campus dipshit environment, like maybe these people, but they're a minority and they have no power. And I don't think they're really representative of like a broader social interest, you know?
Well, I think you're downplaying it a little bit. And when I read tweets like Jesse NYC, who says, I mean, if you're a white person who says they're engaged in dismantling white supremacy, but you're forming a white family, reproducing white children that you want the best for, how is that helping and not part of the problem? There is clearly some elements of the left, and I think you could join me in criticizing them. There are people who are hostile to the very concept of white family. And even if we would disagree on whether Hollywood is one of these elements, at least can we agree that the lady with the tweet or the lady with the big sign that says dismantle the white patriarchy or stop the white family or let's combat heterosexuality, that this is obnoxious?
Yeah, well, maybe they're obnoxious. I don't really form like conspiratorial bents off of like tweets, but I don't think there's anything wrong with saying stop white patriarchy. I would agree with that sentiment, I think, though I probably wouldn't phrase it that way. It sounds kind of obnoxious and preachy when phrased that way. Stop the white family is pretty fucked up. I wouldn't defend that. I should clarify, though, there's a huge difference between saying stop white people or stop white families and stop whiteness. Because I would argue it is important to stop and to fight whiteness, which isn't necessarily an attack against white people. That's just a semantic difference that I see get brought up very often when people talk about like what people said on Twitter, you know?
I think you are allowing a denial of identity, which and maybe it's a nice way to conclude, but at the very beginning of this debate, you said that it was an act of abuse for a parent to kind of disagree with the identity of their children being homosexual. And right now you are denying white people the same. You are telling them
you
that
can be white.
When you say,
if you want,
you are saying that it's okay to combat whiteness, and you would allow it, you would be okay with a sign that says whiteness must be abolished. Don't you think that the parent in a white family reading that sign feels the same as the young children who is gay and who sees his parent tell him that gay is not a proper identity?
The big difference is that, I mean, there are two differences here. One is that white people are majority power holders, and nobody on earth has, like, at least nobody in the United States of America has ever grown up feeling like shit because they're white, or if they do, that is such an incredibly small minority. Whereas I'd be willing to bet probably something like every gay person has at some point been shamed for being gay, unless you're born in fucking San Fran, like as a college prep kid or some shit, I don't know. But when it comes to the whiteness thing, this is like I guess kind of a nuanced distinction that I sometimes take issue with. It's that whiteness is an academic term in a way that I think a lot of people don't recognize. When you say abolish whiteness, we're not saying like abolish white people, hurt white people, blah blah. What we're usually saying is there's a construct, a social construct called whiteness, which is inherently exclusionary. It's what allowed initially the American settlers to discriminate against the Native Americans, to discriminate against the slaves they brought over, and then to the Irish, and then to the Italians, and then to the Polish, but then eventually they would let in the Irish, the Italians, and the Polish, and then to every other group. It's not white people. It's this overarching hierarchy of racial supremacy, and that, I think, is okay to oppose. But I do agree that when people just run around saying, fuck whiteness, tear down whiteness, it does look pretty bad. By the way, the same thing happens over in China. Han Chinese people, Japanese people do the same shit, and now Hindu nationalists over in India are forming the exact same like exclusionary superstructure. And if I lived in those countries, I'd be criticizing their ideas of the same.
Well, it was a fascinating discussion. I think that you end on essentially an appeal to a double standard that you inject there that is typical of leftism, which is, oh, well, because they have power, it's okay. And it illustrates perfectly to me what's the problem with leftism. It's this resentment and entitlement that, okay, because they have power, we're going to allow ourselves a couple of attacks that we can do against them, but that they shouldn't do against us. You justify it furthermore by creating this concept of whiteness as an academic concept concept, an abstract conception, when in fact earlier in our discussion you were saying, look, there's nothing cultural Marxist about academia, but the first moment you need to run away from reality, you run to your concept of whiteness as an academic concept. And this beautifully illustrates what I've said about academia. It's a bunch of concepts that are designed to attack legitimate white families, the white lifestyle, and we must combat it. And you've demonstrated it in full today. I'm
But
satisfied.
It's not the white lifestyle. It's just a concept of supremacy. There would be no whiteness as described academically in a racially equal society. But there'd still be white people.
Oh. We are back to racial equality, which I don't think we can even
I know. Okay, well, hey, listen, one of these days, listen, okay? Here's what we're going to do, all right? I'm going to apparently take over America. I feel like I'm a long way away from that, but maybe, God willing, enough people will die. I'll be next in line to the secession of the United States presidency. I'll try to make a racially equal society, and then when everything is in perfect parity 400 years down the line after we've abolished income, like generational inequality, then we can decide, like, which races actually have, like, the coolest IQ stats, okay? But we have to fix racism first, or all the data is being confounded by lurking variables.
All right, I'll be waiting in Antarctica. Don't tax me. Okay. Bye.
I promise. That was a ride.